Welcome back to Ask an Expert. I'm your host, Chris Howard, and today we're going to talk cybersecurity. Cybersecurity incidents continue to be a significant concern in 2024. According to Gartner, the frequency and negative impact of cybersecurity incidents on organizations are on the rise. This trend is driven by various factors, including generative AI, unsecure employee behavior, third-party risks, continuous threat exposure, boardroom communication gaps, and identity-first approaches to security. It's obviously very important for organizations to stay vigilant and adopt robust security measures to mitigate these risks. But the topic of cybersecurity can seem overwhelming at first glance. So recently, I asked cybersecurity expert Alan Jacks to discuss some of the simplest things to consider to keep us safe.
While in the military, I learned a principle that's applied, and I like to apply in some of the things that I work with, and it's the KISS principle, which stands for keep it simple, and in this case, we'll say security. A few years ago, Microsoft put out a presentation that listed the 5 things that would safeguard, if implemented, against 98% of attacks. I come across businesses that haven't implemented those 5 safeguards, and you really need to start with something simple. And those 5 things are requiring multi-factor authentication, applying zero trust principles, using anti-malware, keep up to date on software, and protect your data that you have. And going into each of those, so the first one, multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication allows the user to verify who they are, not only with a password, but also something that they have. It can be a phone, it could be an attachment into a USB slot. So not only is there a password, but a secondary factor to authenticate. If you're sitting, and this is a true story, if you're sitting in a private area by yourself with no computer in front of you and you get a multi-factor authentication code, don't say, yes, it's me. You should be logging at the time when you use the authentication app. There are different ways you can do it. As I said, one is via text, which is probably the least recommended. I would use an application or a physical key. And the second one is apply zero trust principles. The zero trust principles are things like assuming a breach, be aware of constantly monitoring your environment, and then use least privilege. A user should only have access to the systems that they need to at the time. Just because a person has access may not mean that they have access all of the time. Would it be suspicious that somebody is using an application after hours? It could be allowed, but may not be recommended. So you want to look at what device the user is using, what time they're logging in, where they're physically located, including IP address, geolocating IP address. So the assumption is you trust nothing and you get proof from the device, the user, and the time frame. So anti-malware's come a long way. Applications are updated several times a day for the latest vulnerabilities that are going on. But there's also advanced anti-malware where they don't just use signatures, but look for behaviors that are out of the ordinary. If you're suddenly opening hundreds of documents, it can block those, it can stop those. But there's also things in our anti-malware that not only can it detect it, but it can take advanced actions. Things like shutting down the wireless network, shutting down the network connection that can stop, that can send then an alert be sent, and then somebody can take a look at what's going on. So one of the things I always check on almost on a daily basis is my machine vulnerable to patching? Do I have the latest patches on my machine? It's important to not only stay up to date, but be aware of what's going on in regards to what the latest vulnerabilities are. This includes operating systems, third-party applications that are commonly used, Zoom, WinZip, internet browsers are an attack vector where, when used, can be used to be exploited. So the idea is you do want to be aware of the applications that are being used across your environment, patch them on a regular basis, and actually have a patch management process where on a monthly or quarterly basis, you're at least looking at what vulnerabilities you do have, and then remediating those ones in a critical high fashion. As an organization, it's important to know what you have, where you have it, and who has access to it. The need to protect data. All data is not the same. You don't need to treat the cafeteria menu the same as medical information. So the important first is to start with the classification of data. Classify those ones, that data that needs limit one to access, but also the locations of where it can reside. And you need to be thinking about, can the data be taken off the device? Can it be downloaded? Can it be viewed on a BYO device from home? Is that reasonable? So the first part of the process is know what data you have. The next part is to classify it, and then figure out who has access and where it could possibly reside. And these things include backups going off site. Are they going to the cloud? Who has access to it in the cloud? And is it possibly even going to another country through backups? And then when the data is no longer required, that there is a removal process, the destruction of all data where it may reside, whether it's cloud-based takes, and then sign off of the destruction of that data. One of the things I see is people have years and years of email that have access to. That increases the risks of during an exploitation that more data is available to it. So you do need to be following data destruction and protect the data that's critical to the organization.
Well, there you have it. 5 tips to keep you as safe as possible. Enable multi-factor authentication, use the zero trust approach, implement anti-malware, keep your systems up to date, and always protect your data. Thanks very much for watching this edition of Ask an Expert. We'll catch you next time.